So Moonshine seems to be displaying fear on the right side of her body. She's probably only ever been led from the left side of her body. You know, and as we teach you guys in the Positive Progress series, we need to train both sides of the horse equally, because most people avoid the right side of their horse, all of our attacks undone on the right side. And what that creates is we don't spend enough time on that side of our horse, and they don't actually learn how to behave with us in that position. Gareth is permitting a little bit of curiosity about the saddle. We are in fact talking about the saddle. So she's allowed to smell and look around. You know, at this stage she's very young, very green. She can look at anything she wants to. She can sniff and explore her environment without being made to feel wrong about it. Ray Hunt says never knock the try out of a colt. We don't want to knock the try out of this horse, so she seems rather distracted. She'd like to go back to her family and friends. The sun's setting, you know, all sorts of reasons for a horse to be worried, as well as she hasn't had much training time in her life. So she's allowed to explore her world instead of be made to feel wrong for being curious about what her world holds. Gareth drove her at the shoulder, sent her off forward. Disengage her, show teacher game over. Gonna wait for the near foot to step in front of the hind foot. Stand in front of Gareth, 2 eyes and 2 ears. Stop, turn, face, and wait.
If I was a teacher, same narration, a little bit hang it on the rest is just set up the feet for the lead.
So Gareth is commenting that he wants to make sure that he sets Moonshine up to leave without having her feet tangled. And if a horse's feet are tangled, their safety is compromised. When their safety is compromised, they will fight because they won't be able to take flight. So to gain partnership with this horse, Gareth wanted to back her up and set her feet up in a way where she could walk off and to Gareth's right. You can see she argues and she kind of leans on the halter and pulls a little bit. She's just trying to figure out what her job entails. We can't really fault her for that. So pressure motivates, release teaches. And the principle here is never ever release on a brace. So when she didn't want to go forward, Gareth kept asking. So she knew that it was her job to travel forward, and she was only going to earn a release for traveling forward like Gareth had asked. Gareth is going to work at leading by the feet. Moonshine we've had to do some work with her feet to be able to get her trimmed about 2 months ago. Gareth wants to see if maybe we can get her connected to her feet by leading with the feet exercise. So she learns to yield to pressure. When we take away our horse's ability to flight, say a predator has their foot, they have to start thinking about other ways to get out of the situation. If we are methodical about how we do that, she'll realize that if she yields that foot, Gareth quits tugging on her foot and she now has control over her feet. And she expresses that she understood that because she stood still, she didn't do anything. She might lean on it and Gareth will say, don't go anywhere. Everything that we do with the horses needs to come down from our brain to our hands, to the rope or the reins, through the horse's face and the halter, through the rope on their foot. And the message needs to get all the way down to their feet. That's what we're working on now. So if you watched our first month of Masterclass series, you saw us with a very Unfortunately, I had a lot of trouble and a lot of issues, and Gareth, proclaimed that it was the most difficult horse he's ever started. Um, we had, we had neighbors shooting at monkeys. We had horses in other paddocks running around like maniacs. We had power tools running all around us. So I'm hoping that for Moonshine we get a nice, soft, quiet, easy ride so she has fewer distractions to work with. That being said, we're not going to stop what we're doing because of distractions, because in the real world you don't get to stop riding your horse. Or you're not going to enjoy your horse if you have to stop for every possible distraction. We want to work through that and help our horses become desensitized and brave in their environment. You can see she's quite heavy on her feet. So Gareth has to use all of his body weight, so as light as possible when he asks and as firm as necessary until she yields her feet. It's going to be very, very difficult to get this horse to travel forward when we want her to. A horse that doesn't travel forward is a horse that likes to buck or rear. So we want to set up a positive pattern of behavior now for her and learn to yield her feet and yield to pressure. That's looking better. Actually, Gareth is working a little less, trying to get her to yield her feet a little bit more. It's getting a little bit lighter, and she earned a release. So what I like now is her head's coming down out of the air, she's blinking, the tongue's coming out, so she's not as introverted as she was when we first started our session. She's looking relaxed. So just that leading by the feet exercise was able to build in enough communication and understanding that she's finally started looking like she was not ready to crawl out of her skin from the situation. It doesn't mean that's not going to show up again. It will probably show up many times in our training process. But it was a great way for her to start thinking a little bit instead of reacting. Everything that we teach you through the Positive Progress series is to teach a horse to respond rather than react. A horse that's reactive tends to become dangerous very quickly. A horse that responds thinks. I'm just going to keep that foot in the air until she yields it. She relaxes her hindquarters, and she actually has to soften the psoas muscle, the muscles through her loins and hips that cause the reset button, the same thing that a disengagement causes. So now that she's relaxed, standing there quietly with her foot and not bugged by the rope around her foot, Gareth's going to ask her to yield her foot again. I think Gareth's thought process here is he wants to have a little more communication before he sends her off and out and moves her too much, so he doesn't have to end up with a big sweaty battle where horse and human have lost communication. Gareth is trying to get control over those feet quickly and get the message through to Moonshine that she needs to yield her feet when a human asks for it. Gareth is making sure that he makes lots of time for encouragement. We don't want this to be a stressful process for the horse at all. There's enough stresses that come up in a horse's life. They're born cowards and worry about everything. That's how they survive. So we want this session to be relaxing. We want to leave it where the horse feels confident in what we ask of her, even if it's just something as simple as lifting a foot a few inches off the ground. You know, we're making headway into having control over this horse's feet in her riding future. It's very nice. You know, though Gareth still has to put pressure on the rope to ask her to lift that hind foot. She's doing it so he doesn't have to use so much muscle. She's becoming a more willing partner and learning how to yield to the pressure on her foot. You know, when we think about all of the things that require us to have control over a horse's hindquarters, we need to have control over those hind feet, and that needs to start now. You know, ideally, you know, when a foal's born, you start picking up their feet the first day of life through the imprint training process. By the time they get to the age where they're ready to be started and ready to carry on becoming a riding horse, you already have these basics in place. You know, so in a perfect world, we'd love for you to have learned all of this and done all of this with your horse before you ever get to the backing process. I like that she's stepping her hindquarters away and she's trying to find like a respectful stance there. Still gets a little tangled up, which is quite normal at this age. If you spend any time around young horses, they will, you know, they're just looking to give you the right answer. She's trying to figure out where Gareth wants her feet. Now she went a little disrespectful. You saw she kind of pushed into Gareth's space. So Gareth will back her up and reset as he's trying to get back to that last foot. Let's see if she pulls on the halter there. Gareth needs to make sure he's got control over the nose before he gets a rope around that hind leg. You know, the benefit of these videos is you can kind of watch what happens, you know, many times. There's so much going on here, like even with me talking through Gareth's session. You know, I encourage you to go back and watch the videos again. Notice the lean in, notice when the horse decided to leave, notice when she went from being respectful to not understanding, and how Gareth goes about recovering it without a lot of dust, without a lot of sweat, and without a lot of stress. What I like is she's starting to blink a little bit more. She still has her nose pointed directly at home at the gate. Kind of a wrinkled nose. I'd really rather not. You know, and if you think about it, you can't blame a horse for not having the best attitude in their first encounters with humans. You know, we have all these funny demands of them. So Gareth thinks that this foot's going to be fun. Sorry for the dust. What I like is that her body's wrapped around you and she's thinking. So when you think about putting in the lateral flexion to an indirect rein under saddle, what we're doing is we're trying to get a horse to soften its loin and bend through its body to maintain relaxation, or, you know, kind of reset the anxiety button. So we thought that this was going to be difficult, but if you saw before Gareth picked up the foot, she curled her body around him. You know, she has to soften her body and not have so much adrenaline going in order to do that. So it's actually a really positive sign that she's trying to understand, she's trying to comply, and she's trying to pay attention to what it is Gareth wants. It's a beautiful thing. Alright, so the next step of our process is, again, accept the saddle. Okay, so she's had a moment or two to sniff the saddle. She kind of knows what's coming. It smells like her sister. We've just backed her sister as well. You know, so Gareth is going to give her a chance to go over there and look at it. He's going to make sure that his basics are in place. Remembering that when we start a horse, let's accept the saddle, accept the human, accept the rider. So right now Gareth is simulating the girth. We don't want to leave anything to chance and find out that she's going to have a big blow up later on. Or in fact cause her to have a big, dusty, dramatic, anxiety-filled blow up. Gareth is just checking out how she's going to feel about the girth grabbing her over her heart. See if she can handle that and maintain that. Just one of the many steps I'd like you to add to your training process, to make sure that your horses come up braver and in partnership mode from your training.
Especially starting English saddle, it's not difficult. There's some
Yeah.
when they come.
So one of the things that often happens when we ride horses in our Western saddles, in South Africa you have mostly English riders or people that ride in stock saddles or endurance saddles, and you go to put the Western saddle with the rear girth on there, and it usually causes a bit of an upset just because they've never felt it there. So whatever this little horse's future holds, it doesn't matter. We're trying to make sure that the horse has felt the front girth, the horse has felt the back girth, and had no reason to be worried about those things.
Compared to her sisters, she's definitely got a more trainable temperament. It's still great.
So we've done Moonshine's sister, and Gareth thinks that his sister has a little bit of a better temperament. Remains to be seen. Moonshine is just a young horse trying to figure out life, so she may come out being just as good. But trainability-wise is certainly something we want to think about in horses. If you think about the first videos in the masterclass series, where Mateen was so challenging with Gareth, and he, all of these issues came up, and what we thought was going to be a simple process we were going to share with you, and everything popped up, and really there's only one thing in the horse's history that explains some of the behavior, but in gaining more history from mom and sister and the other horses from those breeding lines, they're distinctively difficult. They come with warning tags and danger signs all over the place. So good genetics matter. Trainability matters. When you're thinking about picking the perfect partner. Having a horse that's eager to learn and wants to learn, or a horse that you can set up a good learning frame of mind with. Those are things you need to pay attention to and that really matter as a professional. When you're looking at clients' horses, how much time is it going to take? Well, you're going to take all the time it takes, but how much time does it take to train a horse? A horse that has a really great trainable temperament, is just a little bit less work. Horses that have kind of a history, or perhaps some, not as lovely bloodlines to work with, just be prepared to take a little bit more time, remembering that the horse is in charge of the timeline. I don't believe that there's any horse that's untrainable. There are certainly horses that are easier to train. This particular horse is a Basudu Pony Appaloosa Quarter Horse cross. We just think she's a darling little thing. So all of those things in there, Basudu ponies are highly trainable and great work horses with great work ethics. The quarter horse has a long history. And more recently, in the last 75 years, people use their horses less and less for work and more for pleasure. So the bloodlines that have survived and passed down through that time are a more trainable weekend warrior type horse. So, and then you have the Appaloosa in there that, really are partner horses. So we actually have a pretty trainable, willing partner, by genetics here. So I think everything that you see is her just having some anxiety and being defensive over moving around a predator. But what's in there is some really good breeding and a lot of love to put together a nice horse that hopefully will bring years of joy to her owner in the future. Gareth is checking out the pad. The pad was no sweat, no big deal. Gareth is going to let her move with something sitting on her back. So Gareth is checking out the front girth and the rear girth with something on her back. Break everything down into stages for your young horses. Simulate as much as you possibly can, so that way the training process is easy and understood, eliminates all the confusion. If you have someone explain things to you step by step, you're not as confused when you go to learn something. We want to provide that for the horse as well. She looks like she's pretty accepting and willing, hey? Like even though she's distracted, she looks like she's down with the process. When I think of like my favorite breeds of horses, I grew up with quarter horses and paints. Appaloosas are the love of my life. And moving to South Africa, the Basutu pony has just absolutely captured my heart. I've seen Basutu ponies go through some pretty horrendous things and still be willing partners that show up to do their job every day with heart. This little horse is destined for a riding school to teach little kids how to be around horses. And right now I look at her and I think there's a lot of potential for that job in there. One of the worst things you can do the first time you saddle a horse and the first 50 times you saddle a horse is hide the saddle from them. It becomes a great big surprise when all of a sudden that dead thing that was hanging on the fence shows up on their back. So we're going to be as obvious as possible. If you've ever visited with Gareth about, why we hate the term horse whispering implies secrecy. We want to be loud and obvious so that way there are as few surprises as possible for the horse. If you don't have the surprises, your horse builds confidence. So Gareth is being careful how he carries his saddle. He's got to see if he can swing it over there with a little drama. Let it feel more comfortable when it goes on her back. He's not sneaking it around. He's not coming at her like a grizzly bear carrying a dead cow. He's putting it up there very matter of fact. The first time you saddle a horse, I would love for you to saddle a horse with the idea that this horse has been saddled every day and you're going to do it the same way every time you saddle the horse. If we start having to kind of sneak around, it becomes something that we have to sneak around to do later on in their life. And doesn't give a horse a very bright future. Thinking of you guys as working professionals, the more obvious you are to these young horses or troubled horses that you're retraining, the easier their life becomes, remembering that we want to honor this training process, honor their learning process, honor that they're going to allow a predator to ride on their back on another dead animal, have appreciation for that. Being very matter of fact in the learning process for these young horses is how we get horses so good and so confident for their future. Very nicely done, Gareth. So she's allowed to investigate the tack. The thing is we're not having any secrecy. About what's happening and what's gonna become of it. She's accepted the saddle the first try. No drama, no dust. So Gareth is going to repeat the process just so it becomes a learned behavior. Horses learn in as little as 3 to 5 tries. That first saddling went so beautifully and smoothly, no worry, no stress, no drama. So Gareth is going to repeat that process and probably move her off with the saddle now so she can feel the dead weight hanging on her body and realize it's nothing to worry about. If you look closely at Gareth's saddle, there's, our ladder goes and girths hanging down, and it's really quite noisy. And we do that on purpose, and we actually encourage you when you're starting young horses to not make it, pristine and small and quiet. That's just going to help her with the desensitizing as she learns to carry that saddle, as that saddle moves around her. Things might tickle her in funny places that she doesn't expect. So it just adds to the desensitizing process for later on. If you're going to do any type of functional Western riding, or if you're going to use your horses for cow work, they're going to need to get used to these heavy saddles. And all the things that hang on them, we might as well get that taught in the first session instead of waiting for it to be a surprise. So the buckles clang, the stirrups kind of bump into them, and this is all the real world for them. She's a lot more round than Mateen, hey?
But even
So Gareth is adjusting his front girth, and the last horse that he rode actually is bigger than her, but she has a much deeper set chest. That deeper set chest allows for wing capacity later on when we're riding our horses. It's always a good thing. But that wind capacity is what makes for a great weight carrier. You know, Basutu ponies, quarter horses, and Appaloosas are all, you know, stock type horses that are meant to work and work hard.
She would carry something heavier than distance.
You know, she's got the capacity there to be a workhorse and really carry some weight and to have some longevity in her workday. These are all things that I appreciate about stock type horses. What I love is you can see that Moonshine is, you know, she's again curving herself around to look at Gareth, acknowledge the thing on her back. You know, she's not stoic. She's part of the process. She doesn't look that introverted now. You know, she's kind of listening to things going on around her. She's not as worried about where her herd is. She's staying focused on Gareth and the process. Probably a little irritated that I'm chatting away over here. She looks offended. Do you mind? What I like is that she's standing with her feet square. You know, and I think with Mateen we talked about, you know, make sure the horses that you're starting are in good condition before you start the training process. Through stress and using muscles that they haven't used before, if they're in poor condition, you don't get very much honesty from the horse. And so you might have a horse who kind of lacks some nutrition and energy one day and seemed pretty easy, and then lo and behold you give them a couple of good meals and they have more energy than you were planning for. And I think that might have been some of the things that we saw with Mateen in the first Masterclass series. For Moonshine, she's a nice, stocky, well-rounded horse. She's really, really healthy. You know, she may not be fit, but she's healthy enough to gain fitness and put on muscle and use her use her body as we want her to in an athletic manner. So she stretches out there, not quite sure what to do with that weight on her back. So Gareth is basically just going to repeat the positive progress steps to make sure that she can move her hindquarters back up, move her forequarters, and then be sent off. You can see she's kind of dancing around trying to figure out what to do with her feet. Is she really relaxed? We saw this happen with Mateen, where he would kind of cock a hind foot, and he looked like he was gonna kind of jump past Gareth and kick him. I really feel like this is kind of relaxation and not quite sure how to balance herself carrying weight. There's a very different attitude about it, and those are the little things that I want you to start making mental note of when you're training, because I wouldn't perceive that as anything wrong or untoward. She's still not fully relaxed, but she's a lot more relaxed than we saw Mateen. And she doesn't look like she's going to do anything wrong. She's just standing there waiting for further instruction. Beautiful disengagement. She gives Gareth 2 eyes and 2 ears, ears forward. She gets to sniff the saddle a little bit. It's a beautiful response. You know, when you think about the average backing that we want to do, we want it to look this stress-free, this drama-free. You know, this little horse started out quite tense and quite worried and wasn't sure she wanted to be away from her herd. All of that has left through a little bit of groundwork. And she seems like she's kind of buying into the process. We would like every session to look this fluid, this easy, this matter of fact, this everyday. Gareth is sending her forward. Remember, if we lift it, lead it, swing it, touch it, we're going to put pressure in front of the drive line. Ask the horse to go forward, maintaining the principle of as firm as or as light as possible, as firm as necessary. Pressure in front of the drive line, so everything in front of the girth causes a horse to go forward. So now she just needs to learn how to yield her feet in that direction and carry the weight at the same time. So it's a repeat of what we did on the ground in preparation for the saddling. So Gareth is commenting that it's a much more obvious lick and chew. So maybe being an introvert isn't her true nature, and that's very likely.
It's just fear-based.
And that's a very likely scenario. So, this horse may still lean towards being an introvert, and kind of what I've seen of her, I think that she is. But Gareth feels that that now she's being more obvious in her lick and chew and her learning process and her acceptance of things. So she was just remaining introverted in case she needed to defend her life, which is a pretty normal thing to show up. That she may truly be an introvert by nature. I don't think that she's going to stay deeply and heavily introverted, because now she's looking around, she's blinking, her nose isn't wrinkled.
She'll balance out easy, I think.
And in all likelihood, kind of knowing the parents, they're all of her parents and grandparents are fairly balanced, easygoing horses, so we wouldn't expect her to have a ton of issue with being unbalanced or being extremely extroverted or anything like that, going back to the thought process of, good genetics, creating a great temperament for us weekend warriors who only get to see our horses a few times a week. This is a much better temperament to choose for if that is your situation. Thinking about choosing the right horse for yourself or your clients. If a horse needs 10 times more time than the average horse, that's not the right horse for someone who only gets to see their horse once a week. I love how she wants me to be quiet. I'm making comments. She looks over her shoulder at me. Do you mind? Gareth is doing a little desensitizing now. Pressure motivates, release teaches. Rhythm, relaxation, retreat. Could you do that on this side of the camera? Okay, sure. So Gareth is going to work his easy side first to help the horse build confidence before he goes to the tough side. Gareth has a lot of success by employing that one very, very specific plan of teaching. She had trouble on her right side, so Gareth is going to get her a little more confident on the left side, so when we go to the right side, though she can't transfer everything from left side to right side, she will at least have a little bit more confidence to hang out and wait for what Gareth is trying to communicate to her. Moving the forequarters over, Gareth's going to do a little desensitizing on this side. Rhythm. Going to wait for the horse to relax a little bit, give us any sign that she's relaxing and trying to do the right thing. Yeah, so Gareth was kind of wanting her to put her nose there.
Nope.
There we go. Rhythm, relaxation, retreat. Okay, so we've done the first Accept the Saddle session with Moonshine. Thank you for joining us, and we hope that you'll join us for the rest of the Masterclass series.